Welcome, everybody. If you're watching live, as always, please feel free to ask any questions along the way. If you think you might like to join me yourself one day, please do get in contact. My details are on the channel's about page. Today's guest will not be using webcam, so I'll be turning mine off as well. But please welcome Matt Campbell. Hello, Matt.
Hi, it's
How
great
are
to
you
be here.
doing? Thank you for joining us. It's very, very good to hear from you. So you are partially sighted, and I think if you'd be willing to just sort of introduce yourself, say who you are, and what we're going to be talking about, that'd be fantastic.
I'm Matt Campbell, a partially sighted software developer, and I'll be talking about um, accessibility, particularly for blind and low vision people, and along with that, the history of accessibility as I've experienced it throughout my life and my work in this area. I am 42 years old, so I grew up more or less with the personal computer, and I look forward to talking about that and doing some demos along the way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Would you like to just sort of fill us in quickly on childhood and sort of how your life has progressed to today?
Sure. So I was born visually impaired due to underdeveloped optic nerves, and um, I've often thought about how to describe what that's like for me, and of course, it's yeah, difficult. To some extent, it's difficult to do that because it's all I've ever known. I
Hmm.
don't know anything different. I don't know firsthand what I've been missing. But the best analogy I can think of is that I think that my limited vision is kind of like um, looking at a small, low resolution screen. So my field of vision is limited, and so it's like it's not a widescreen. My visual field is limited. I understand that I can't see as far off to the side as most as people with normal sight can,
Hmm.
but also I can't see in as much detail. So, for instance, I can read the computer screen, but I have to do it up close, looking with basically with my head probably less than an inch away from the screen in most cases, and that is with some enlargement of fonts as well. And you'll see that when I share my screen. But I was born that way, and my first exposure to talking computers was when I was in what we in the U.S. call first grade. So I was about 7 years old. This was about 1987 or 88, um, and I was attending a mainstream public school, as I did from kindergarten through seventh grade, but I always attended throughout that time whichever public school in town had the best special education resources for the blind and low vision kids, meaning not only the technology but also the teachers who knew how to teach us the special skills that we would need. And so, uh, just to kind of set the scene for, and I have a an Apple IIe emulator which I'm going to use to uh, imperfectly because it's emulation, but
Hmm.
still pretty good. Reenact my first childhood memory of hearing a talking computer, or
That's
rather,
awesome.
overhearing it from the other side of the room.
Okay.
Because just to set the scene here, I was in first grade, and the teacher had me laboriously practicing my handwriting because remember, I have some usable vision, and this teacher seemed to be of the opinion that I should be taught to make the most of that.
Right.
And given the very early state of computer technology at the time, I can understand why.
Mhm.
Practically speaking, the best thing for a lot of my class assignments and even some homework was going to be to handwrite it
Right.
like my sighted peers did. So I was on one side of the room, sitting at a table, laboriously practicing handwriting, and on the other side of the room, and if you would go ahead and put me on screen now, because I'm
Yeah,
about to
sure.
fire this up. On the other side of the room, I don't know if it was a another student or maybe one of the cited teachers who was preparing some material for one of the students, would turn on the computer and I would hear something like this. This emulator does have fairly good emulated floppy disk sounds.
It's
Now,
fantastic.
this was not my first time using a computer. The previous school year in kindergarten, I remember using again an Apple computer running an educational game called First Letter Fun. But
Max
that
copyright one
this
line
was
eight
new.
five byte rail.com you can enter configuration.
And I guess my reaction to that at the time when I heard it was, this is weird. What's it saying? Because copyright. I don't think I even knew what copyright was back then.
Hmm. Hmm.
Never mind copyright. um, and I can't. I'm not exactly sure if the it said enter configuration,
Hmm.
and because this program is called Bex, and it's basically a talking, well, can be talking, word processor and braille translation program. So a blind person could use it as a word processor and then print it out in print out either print out what they entered, or have it run through a braille embosser and get it
Okay.
out in braille. Or a sighted person could use it as a word processor and then translate what they had written into braille for a blind
I
person
see.
to read.
Okay. So
And so
when you
there's
first
different.
mentioned, we were
Go
talking
ahead.
ahead of the stream, and you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I think now, that the Apple II was able to do this, screen reading type stuff. I was surprised. I had no idea that that was even a thing back then. So can you sort of fill us in on how this works? Is this
Sure.
Bex program specifically screen reading, or is there some driver behind the scenes? How does it work
There
there?
is okay, yeah, there is. So Bex is this word processor and braille translator. Um, I can show you a little bit of how it works from
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's prompting for a configuration, and depending on which configuration file you choose, it can go on talking or not. And because, like I said, it could be used by a blind person or a sighted person, or a
Mhm.
sighted person wouldn't want to hear it talking the whole time. And I don't remember actually which one it was when I was overhearing it on the other side of the room. I just remember
Mhm.
this startup sequence. But
Mhm.
I'm going to enter a configuration that does keep talking.
Okay.
And this configuration file mess is named after, well, this particular disk image that I found online was prepared for an older emulator called Mess.
Hmm.
And so uh, anyway, that's where that file name comes from. And I later got to hear this next part of the startup sequence many times myself when I was using the program as an older student.
Okay. I love the floppy sounds.
Yes.
Max is owned by Max Apple user zip code Anton Max serial number 0000000. Start the menu.
Now, in reality, it would have said Bex Disc owned by the name of the person that, yeah, headed up the technology program in our school system,
Hmm.
zip code 672 something or other. But this disk image, of course, was prepared long after the program was being sold
Hmm.
commercially,
Yeah. Okay.
with the permission of the original program author. So we've got the startup menu. I'm just going to press Q to quit Bex and go back to the AppleSoft Basic interpreter for
Okay.
a moment.
You ready?
And it displayed it's got a right bracket prompt, which the screen reader, which is a program called Text Talker, translates to ready. Now, so I can just type in stuff. I can run commands from Basic like you would on an Apple, and Text Talker, the screen reader slash speech synthesizer. It was a single program that really did both duties. Will read the output, so I could do a catalog of the disk.
T-A-T-A-L-O-G. Raise the top FS equals 6 for A005 hello, A017 load, A049 set, A029 start, A018 print, A012 watt, A009 for A007 RAM, B014 out point bin, B010 aux point bin, B017 start point bin, B003
It's
cable
just gonna
point
go
bin,
for another 30
B004
seconds or
cartridge
so
point
here.
bin, B010 car point bin, B020 fit, B004 text talker point RAM, B048 text talker point top, B007 stat.
And I'm just going to interrupt it because it just said the part that I was actually interested in,
Okay.
which was the two Text Talker files.
So the interesting thing for me initially is that this output is that sort of in real time the same sort of speed that it would have been if you weren't using Text Talker, or is this slowed
No, it is
down so that it
not.
can
It,
announce
it,
each
it is
line one
being
by one?
slowed down. And in
Okay.
fact, if I do a control F12 in the emulator, which would be equivalent to control reset on the Apple.
Okay.
And now that I have done a semi reset, Text Talker is no longer active. And if
Right.
I run catalog again,
Okay.
yeah, so you can see, oh, Control C didn't actually abort it. I have forgotten most of what I ever knew about the Apple II.
That's fair enough.
But I do remember a little bit about how Text Talker worked and its limitations, and I misunderstood for a long time the division of duties between the echo hard so the sound the speech that you're hearing was from a card called the echo,
Right.
and it was a card that would go in one of the slots in the Apple, and it would connect to a little speaker on the outside. It was like a little speaker box that would be placed beside the computer or wherever. And the Echo is, for a long time I thought that the Echo card itself was doing the speech synthesis, but it's more accurate to think of the Echo as being like what we would now call a sound card, and it was using a very low bit rate of and even compressed form of digital audio, but the Echo card itself had no speech synthesis capabilities. That was entirely done by the Text Talker software,
Mhm.
which had to be very small back then because
Yeah.
it needed to fit so the Apple II Plus introduced something called the 16K language card, which was an additional 16K of RAM that could be added to the 2 Plus, and the Text Talker needed to fit in that upper 16K of RAM so it could stay out of the way of any mostly basic programs that were
Okay.
being run alongside it.
So when you say then that sounds like there's the Echo card is thing one that you'll need on top of just a standard Apple II, and
Yes.
then the extra memory expansion is sort of thing two. Does
Well,
that does that get you to the point, or and obviously the software as well?
yeah, although, I mean, if you had an Apple IIe, like the ones that we were running at school, you already had the memory expansion.
I see. Okay.
Um, but yeah, the at least by the time that I was that by the time that I was looking at this, the extra thing that any computer that you were running was going to need was the Echo.
Okay.
And even when the Apple IIgs came out in 86 or 87, and the 2GS had a very capable sound capabilities of its own, after all, the S in 2GS stands for sound,
Okay.
it did not have this specific card or anything compatible with this specific card as standard equipment. So when my parents bought an Apple IIgs as our family's first computer in 88, it could not run this software. And there was, and I can show you the one, the best speech synthesis that we did have for the 2GS, but it didn't have this screen reading functionality like Text Talker.
Okay.
And so the only way I was ever going to use the 2GS, I mean, the only way that I did ever use the 2GS was by looking at the screen up close.
Right. Okay. That's very interesting. May I ask another question? This may be
Sure.
entirely related to sort of how you've experienced the world and one person versus another, but it's almost like there's what's the word I'm after? An accent behind the screen reader. So first of all, it for me it speaks very quickly, and second of all, it's actually a little bit difficult to understand. But you might lock into that. Does that sort of ring true for you as well, or is this just sort of how you interact with computers, I guess?
So when I was overhearing it from the other side of the room, it was very foreign to me at first, and I don't remember how many times I had to hear it before I caught on to any of the actual words that it was pronouncing or even mispronouncing, like copyright. It can be slowed down though. Let me
Okay.
just bring Text Talker back up.
Sure.
I'm okay. I must have mistyped something. Let's try that again.
Sure. We've got B run there and text talker.ram.
Oh,
I don't know. Yeah, you got B run again. I'm not sure what's going
B
on
run
there.
is intentional.
That's
the
intentional,
Double
okay.
A was not.
Gotcha.
There we go.
Ready.
Oh,
Ready.
and in fact, when you run it just in its default configuration, it comes out slower. So
Gotcha.
T-A-T-A-L-O-G.
so it comes out
Raise
like
your
this.
cash equals 6 for 8005 hello 8017
And I'm
low
gonna stop it.
80.
Sure.
And the way that I had to stop it was by pressing Control X,
Okay.
because in later in PC screen readers, the convention sort of emerged by consensus that the way that you stop speech is just by tapping any key, and the most harmless way to do that is to just tap the Control key. I
Okay.
don't recall if it was possible to do it that way on the Apple II, so Control X it was.
Okay.
But as you can hear, yeah, it was slower. But even today, a lot of us, especially power users and of my generation, speed up our speech
Oh,
output.
absolutely. And I can completely see why you'd want to do that, because it becomes a waiting game otherwise, almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I will definitely be showing a modern, well, maybe a couple of modern Windows screen readers later.
Okay.
And you can hear, you can hear what my speech output that I use every day sounds like, and I can also temporarily slow it down for the demo.
Okay.
Let me just quickly show the what I did have in terms of speech synthesis on the 2GS at home, and I need to use a different emulator for this, because MAME, the emulator that I was using just now, when I tried it can emulate the 2GS more or less, but when I tried to run this program, it locked up. So and this emulator that I'm now about to run, for anyone who happens to be watching and paying attention, is quite old. It's one that I found in an old backup that I had set up, uh, many years ago. So this one does not have floppy sounds. But for Christmas one year, my parents were trying to buy something that would make the computer talk for me, and they did the best they could. And it's often said that kids don't come with instruction manuals, and that goes double for disabled kids, where the things that we need are not widely known.
Right.
And I mean, maybe I could have been more communicative, but and told them that the computers at school have this thing called an echo. But I think I knew that much at least. But and this disc here is clearly not set up to be accessible to a blind person, because it has come up into a launcher program that's not talking. So fortunately, I can operate it with the keyboard. And now we're starting the real program, which is called Kid Talk.
Okay.
It was not designed for accessibility at all. It was just a consumer software, a talking word processor for kids. But it was the best that my parents knew how to find.
Okay.
At the
When you say it
time.
was for kids, is that sort of more targeted towards people learning to spell and to sound out the letters,
Yeah,
that kind of thing?
yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good talk. From first bite. Have you ever used Good
Oh
Talk
shoot,
before?
this one's
Please
not
click the
speaking,
mouse
is it?
on yes
It
or
is. We
no.
can hear it. Yeah.
Oh, oh shoot.
It's that's a bit
I know
quieter.
why. I know why. Because it was. Now, were you hearing it in just one ear though?
No, it sounded both to me.
Okay. I remember now. I forgot to switch over to mono audio,
Okay.
because the actual original Apple IIgs did not have stereo audio output. It
Mhm.
was an add-on card. Um, but this emulator has stereo, and for whatever reason, Kid Talk was just speaking in one channel. I'm going to answer no to this question about whether you've used it before, just so we can hear it speak a little bit more. Um,
I can't hear it at all now.
oh, you can't.
No.
Oh, shoot. I think I jinxed the demos for the rest of the. Let's see what happens, if anything, if I switch it back.
Sure.
Okay. And let me just try running a screen reader. Can you hear any speech just now?
No, nothing.
Okay. I think I have. All right.
Would you
Well,
like to take a minute to try and fix up
yes,
the sound, or
yes.
yeah?
Let's
Okay.
let's do that. So, I guess you heard enough of that particular demo, though. I wasn't going to
Yeah.
go deep into that program. I just wanted to. I mean, you can hear that it was much better speech synthesis.
I was going to comment as well that it's interesting that, as you say, it was not targeted for people who have visual difficulties. So, and immediately the first
Yeah.
thing you have to use the mouse. Yes or no? Have you used this before, kind of thing?
Right. Right. Yeah. Let me. I'll pick up that thread as soon
Hmm.
as I. As soon as I see if I can recover. Okay. Now.
Three young and one more edge. Personal Microsoft Edge with
We hear that. That's good. And I don't hear
Okay, but
myself,
you
which
are
is also
not
good.
hearing
amateur
yourself.
stuff. Everyone can see and hear you.
Okay, good.
Fine.
So, yeah. So as
Three
you
young dot com.
said,
Three young and one more. Three young dot com is carrying your screen and audio at one column two.
I see.
Three young and tab action. Top search.
Let's
Three young
close
dot
that
com.
window again.
Search.
And
Top settings. Three young dot com is carrying your screen and audio. Three young dot com is carrying your screen. Three young dot carrying and link.
That's the one.
Three young and command prompt.
there. Yeah. So as you said, Kid Talk, as well as its more grown up equivalent, the word processor called Smooth Talker from the same company, was not designed at all for accessibility. As far as I know, they never put out a product that was designed for accessibility. And what I specifically mean by that is a screen reader that can read whatever text output is appearing on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth noting that even Text Talker was quite limited in what what programs, even text-based programs, it was able to interact with. For instance, there was a popular what we used to call integrated software suite for the Apple II called AppleWorks. It had a word processor, a database, and a spreadsheet. Those were like the original three killer apps for a personal computer for like productivity and business. And I did a lot of my homework on AppleWorks, but it could not be made, as far as I know, was never made to talk with Text Talker, because what Text Talker had to the way that Text Talker worked was when the basic interpreter in the ROM of the Apple II was printing out output, it would call. So there was like a table somewhere in RAM of that could be used to redirect certain ROM routines, including the output routine, to go somewhere else. I guess so that third-party products wanting to extend the ROM functionality, or maybe system software wanting to work around bugs in the ROM, could sort of patch those routines at runtime.
Sure.
And so Text Talker would redirect those routines to speak whatever was being output. And that was why, as you pointed out earlier, the visual output would be slowed down, because the processor was busy synthesizing the speech for each thing that was being output before that routine returned and went back to the program, which would then output the next thing. But for things, even for more sophisticated text-based programs like AppleWorks that did their own screen output instead of going through the ROM output routines. Or another example, and this one was kind of unfortunate, the Infocom text adventure games, which would have been the best games that could have, in theory, been made accessible, and were accessible on the PC, but not on the Apple II.
Okay.
So
was that to do with sort of cursor manipulation and movement potentially? Just sort of ruining the output.
Cursor movement, and like a good assembly programmer could probably do something that was more efficient for their specific use case than the generic ROM output routines. And like Infocom in particular, they did their I mean, they didn't even use the standard Apple DOS disk operating system. They had their own. It was basically running all their own code from the moment the disk booted, which means that you wouldn't have even had a chance to run Text Talker, even if not for the issue with the output routines.
I see.
And
okay.
so
Interesting.
the same issue would probably have been there on the Apple II GS. And Text Talker did nothing whatsoever for programs that had graphical output.
Yes. Yep.
And on the 2GS, nothing, as far as I know, nothing like Text Talker that could use the built-in sound equipment of the 2GS was ever developed. The only thing I ever heard, and this was by the time I was in the process of moving on from the Apple II family. When I got online in about 94, I got in touch by email with a blind programmer who was still doing some stuff on the 2GS, and
Okay.
he was trying to develop some kind of add-on for Text Talker that could make it work with the standard graphical user interface on the 2GS.
Right.
But he was still using the Echo and Text Talker, and
Okay.
I don't know why that remained, why what seemed like an obvious need remained unfilled.
Yeah, interesting. Very good. Thank
So
you. Thank you for showing that to us. If I'm not sure if you're aware, there's a particular video of, I think probably Steve Jobs presenting an Apple computer. I think it might, I don't remember what it was, speaking. There's this big deal about the Apple computer that spoke. Was this talker, or do you think that was different, or do you not remember
the
what I'm
only
talking about?
Steve Jobs video about this that I'm aware of is the original launch of the Macintosh
Okay, I
in
think you might be right.
1984. And it's this famous moment where he pulls the Macintosh out of the carrying bag, and it says, "Hello, I am
Yes,
Macintosh. It sure
that's
is
the
great to
one.
get out of that bag." And that was done by a program that Apple licensed for this occasion,
Right.
called Software Automatic Mouth, SAM. And an earlier version of SAM, in fact, had actually been made available for the Apple II and a couple of the other 8-bit early personal computers. So that was not Text Talker, and the first actual screen reader for the Macintosh user interface didn't come out until 89.
Okay.
And that was a program called Outspoken, which is, to my knowledge, the first screen reader for a GUI.
Right.
And I wasn't aware that GUI screen readers were even a thing or a possibility until, again, I started to learn about some of this stuff online in 94.
Okay.
So it seems that everything is converging on yeah, that part of my story.
Sure.
So, um,
So
I'll
should we
back.
should we
Go ahead.
return back to the thread that we were on? We were
Okay.
talking about the Apple II, the Apple
Sure.
IIe and GS at home,
All right.
and kind of progressing from there. Should we return to your childhood?
Sure.
Cool.
So my parents bought the 2GS in the summer of '88 when I was almost 8 years old, and we I mean I think it was partly bought for my mother, who was self-employed as an accountant, to use as a work machine, but excuse me, but we all played with it as well, including me.
Hmm.
And I have an uncle named Uncle Eric, who was a big fan of the whole Apple II family of computers, and he was actually not a professional programmer. He was more of a hobbyist. He was a high school teacher, taught band for a long time.
Hmm.
At some point, he got into teaching a high school computer class as well. So, but yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if my parents bought the 2GS largely on his recommendation. I
Okay.
actually, incidentally, have another uncle who was and is a professional programmer, um, but I never really. I mean, I think that I thought that what he was doing was boring, compared to what my uncle Eric was doing, because Uncle
Okay.
Victor did like programming, on mainframes and such
Right.
back then. So we bought the 2GS. Uncle Eric would give us, discs full of games, for the most part, and I remember two experiences in particular that kindled my interest in programming. One was, and I don't remember which order these happened in, because early childhood, faded memories, but one, Uncle Eric was over at our house, and one of his discs full of games had a game that I don't know if he wrote it or he just modified it, but it was some kind of kids game with using the text mode of the computer to display simple shapes like triangles and squares and things, and the shapes had his kids' names on them. and and then he went in and modified the program because it was written in BASIC, and you could go into the BASIC interpreter like I did earlier and modify the program on the fly and save it and run it. And he modified the program to have like my name and my brothers and sisters' names. And I wasn't able to like watch him as he was doing it because I have to be up close to the screen to really see anything, and I would have been in his way. But I saw the result and was suitably impressed by that. And then and it might have been actually the same disc of games that he gave us a copy of. You would boot the disc and it would go into of course none of this was talking. All of this I had to read the screen up close. So you would boot the disc and it would go into a menu of all the games that were on the disc. But the last item on the menu was the program to edit the menu. And so I went in there, and being a little kid, not knowing how things worked, I would just make up a name of a program and try to add it to the menu. And of course, that didn't work. And one of my parents would say, "No, you have to program that new game." And I was like, "Okay, I want to learn to program." And I distinctly remember somewhere around my 8th birthday, my mother trying to explain to me that you couldn't really teach an 8-year-old how to program. But there was another disc that came with the 2GS, again, not talking, but it's called Your Tour of the Apple IIgs, and it taught you how to use the mouse, how to use the keyboard, what a word processor was, how to save files to disks, a bunch of beginner computer stuff. And this, of course, was in the 80s when computers themselves were still a novelty to the general public. So the disk had to start with very introductory material. But the last lesson on the disk was Intro to Programming in BASIC. And I devoured that lesson.
And then you were hooked.
Yes. And
Awesome.
then I finally asked my Uncle Eric to teach me more, and he basically taught me everything he knew. Some years later, at least by the time I got into programming on the PC was when I think I finally sort of got ahead of what he had learned and left him behind. I mean, I don't think I was like mean about it, but it was, and eventually, of course, I became a professional programmer, which he never. Well, that's not entirely fair. I think he had like I think he might have had like one or two commercial programs that he wrote and sold and did moderately well at, but it was never his full-time job. So
Sure.
so yeah, that was my introduction into programming. And in 93, my mother got she had already gotten an IBM compatible PC a few years before for her to use as her business machine. I guess because that world was moving beyond the Apple II. And also, I'm sure the fact that all the rest of us, and especially me, wanted to use the Apple II might have played a part in her getting her own PC.
Need a
But
different one. Yeah.
in 93, she got a better PC, a 486, that could run Windows, and in fact was preloaded with Windows 3.1. And it had, crucially, it had a modem built into it. And so the summer of that year, I convinced my parents that I wanted to get online. And I think the initial thing that I used to convince them that this was something worth doing was, we had just gotten like a few discs of shareware games, and I wanted to download more games for my brothers and sister,
Yeah.
not for me to play.
Of course.
Um, well, no, actually, seriously, not for me to play because
Fair enough.
video
Yeah.
games were never something that I was good at.
Okay.
My,
Was was it used as a justification for
yeah,
internet access? I guess that is what I was going for.
yeah, yeah. Well, not internet initially because
Oh, yeah.
93, at least in most of the U.S., was like the last couple of years before the internet
Mhm.
really started to go mainstream. So I was connecting to local bulletin board systems or BBSs,
Mhm.
but there were networks of these BBSs were connected
Yeah. Yeah.
in various ways,
Yeah.
and the big network of BBSs, of course, was FidoNet, which I the main BBS that I spent most of my time on was never on FidoNet. It was on several like lesser
Mhm.
networks, but still, it was enough for me to start getting and the following year that BBS got internet email as well, not full internet, just email.
Mhm.
But it was enough for me to start getting connected. And as I said, to be able to email that blind programmer who was doing stuff on the 2GS
Yeah.
and to read forum messages where I could start to learn that GUI screen readers were a thing, even
Mhm.
if I wasn't going to get my hands on one until a few years later.
So I think while we're talking before the stream, you mentioned that there was a shift in schooling for you, and that sort of affected your knowledge, your insight into accessibility tools.
Yes,
Can you
yes.
talk to us a
So
bit about that quickly?
yeah, so well, before I talk about that particular switch,
Mm, sure.
in the last year that I attended public schools, seventh grade, um, the special the resource room for the visually impaired students got an upgrade in technology from the Apple II that we had before to an IBM compatible PC running MS DOS. A Hang on, let me see. No, no, uh, I was about to go off on a tangent, but MS DOS,
Okay.
a speech synthesizer called a Keynote Gold, um, a DOS screen reader. As it turned out, one of the less one of the less popular ones, but it did what we needed it to do.
Mhm.
Um, a screen magnifier, which
Okay.
I'll be happy to show at some point how a modern screen magnifier on Windows works.
Yeah.
Um, and we had the main application that I remember us running on this PC was WordPerfect 5.1 for word processing.
Mhm.
And yes, at this point, it was actually possible to use a mainstream word processor with a screen reader, because while DOS screen readers did did a similar thing to what Text Talker did, where they would patch, in this case, the pointer to the BIOS
Mhm.
output routine to speak whatever was being output. There was something else that they could do as well, which was they could install uh, an interrupt handler that could run X number of times per second and look at the contents of screen memory. Since this was text mode still,
Mhm.
um, the characters that were written on the screen were at a standard location in memory. So the DOS screen reader could look at that location in memory and compare it to what had been there before and use various heuristics to figure out if it was time, if there was some new output on the screen that needed to be read.
Yeah.
And the other crucial thing, again, based on the fact that the PC was a much more interrupt driven platform than the Apple II, was that the DOS screen reader could override the keyboard interrupt handler so that it could install its own keyboard commands that could be used pretty much at any time.
Okay.
So the upshot of all that being that, um, again, while being limited only to text mode, a much wider variety of programs, including mainstream programs like WordPerfect, were accessible on the PC as opposed to on the Apple II, where it was basically, basic programs and then custom stuff
Yeah,
written specifically for blind people. So,
that's really interesting.
fortunate. It's kind of fortuitous that upgrade in technology for me at school happened before the schooling transition that you were referring to earlier, which I'll get
Okay.
to now,
Okay.
which was in.
Actually, sorry,
Go ahead.
just quickly, a question from Devon's workshop has come up in the
Sure.
chat. I'm not sure if this is something you'll know about, but you mentioned Sam, and Devon asked, was Stephen Hawking's first voice based on Sam?
It was not.
Okay.
I don't know the full history of how Stephen Hawking ended up with the voice he did, but well, the voice that I'm familiar with, that his voice is most similar to, is one called Deck Talk
Okay.
from Digital Equipment Corporation, so DEC Talk,
Hmm.
and um, I think that, that technology might have gotten like licensed by one or two other companies, and there it was, ended up being kind of a family tree of similar sounding speech synthesizers.
Right.
But
Okay. Because I think he's had a
yeah.
few over the years, and I did at one point know the name of one of them, but I can't remember, I'm afraid.
It was a Pros something or other.
Right.
I think
Anyway,
yeah,
never mind.
but no, not Sam, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Anyway, so back to the
So
story. Sorry.
yeah, so uh, fall of '94, my eighth grade school year, my last year of what we call middle school. Um, so for the previous school year, my brothers and sister had been attending a private religious school, that and we had just moved within town to be closer to that school. Meanwhile, I was still riding a special bus across to the other side of town to attend the public school, and that sort of logistical inconvenience, I guess, combined with the fact that I wasn't happy at the school I was attending in middle school, because other kids were picking on me and stuff.
Right.
Um, and my parents and I, after consulting with my teachers, decided that I was ready to move to the same school that my siblings were attending, even though this small private school had no resources, uh, equipment, teachers, whatever, anything
Hmm.
else really for a visually impaired student.
Okay.
And so
And was this a
um,
move that you were on board with?
it was a move that I was on board with. I thought that I was going to be happier in
Hmm.
the private religious school. I had some very naive ideas about what the kids were going to be like at that school as opposed to the public school. Um, but I knew it was also going to be a challenge in some ways,
Okay.
and one way in particular was that I was now cut off from uh, from having access to the specially adapted computers
Hmm.
like the ones that we had in the public schools that I had been going to. So started out just one thing that we did do, the one of the accommodations that was made for me was that once a week, one of the teachers from the public school system would come out to the private school, and he would meet me outside the school, and we would go off site
Hmm.
where he would give me lessons in how to use the white cane, and how to travel and things of that sort.
Okay.
It was a field that is called orientation and mobility. or O&M. So nothing to do with computers, but so I did. I mean, since no one at the school was equipped, was prepared to teach me any of that stuff, and I clearly still needed to learn it.
Yeah.
We were able to continue doing that. But as far as technology, so starting out in my 8th grade school year, I was taking notes by hand and doing my in-class assignments through handwriting, and or although sometimes they would let me go to the computer room to do some of my assignments on one of the computers there at the school. But I mean, it was obvious that I was going to be more productive and just happier if I could do more of my work both at school and at home on a computer, but especially at school on a computer wherever I was, whatever class I was in. And so the principal, in a move that in hindsight sort of strikes me as deciding to make me the school's charity case,
Right.
decided to start an all-school fundraiser for to buy me a laptop.
Right.
And
Okay.
uh, with the help of some what I understand to be some fairly large individual donations along the way, they made it happen, and they bought me what, and they left it to me and my parents to choose a specific laptop within a price range, and a laptop and screen magnification software to run on it. Because at that time, with the technology of that time, running a screen reader on a laptop was not something that you did, not until
Okay.
a few years later.
Interesting.
But
And so just to clarify then, we're talking about a laptop with sort of a graphical user interface rather than text-based interface.
Um, this was still the age of DOS and Windows 3.1, so
Okay.
I could switch back and forth as I saw fit. But the
Right.
screen magnifier that we ended up buying did support both.
Okay. Interesting.
So um, yeah, so they bought me the laptop. It was a 486 with 4 megs of RAM and 100 something megabyte hard drive, and the 3.5 inch floppy drive was actually an add-on peripheral that it was an external drive that you would plug into the laptop as a PCMCIA card.
Right. Okay.
So and that was that fundraiser came to a conclusion right around Christmas of '94. So I don't I think that was just how the timing worked out, and I, yeah. So they bought me the laptop, and then the principal also turned it into a publicity stunt for the school because he knew he had a contact at one of the local TV news stations.
Right.
So he contacted them and told them what he was doing, and they brought in a reporter and a crew to do some coverage of it. And as part of the coverage, they after the sort of all school assembly where they presented me the laptop, the reporter and camera crew and I and the principal and my parents, I guess, went into a classroom where they could interview us, and then I pulled out my laptop and did a demo of how I could touch type. Because one thing I forgot to mention was that I started learning how to touch type in 1st grade. I mean, say what you will about the teacher making me practice my handwriting, but they did realize did realize that I needed to start learning how to type early. So
Right.
I'm thankful for that. So by 8th grade, when I got the laptop, I was a pro at touch typing.
Awesome.
And so they asked me to demo that for the camera.
Right.
And me being a good little Christian boy at a Christian private school, what did I type? I typed evangelistic Bible verses.
Oh.
So a little bit embarrassing in hindsight,
Yeah.
but and of course I ate up the publicity at the time too,
Okay,
as much as anybody.
I was going to ask
So
about that.
yeah, so that was that, and
Okay.
then
So this selection of the laptop itself and then the software that you got with it, was that um, sort of informed by anyone? Was that something you could consult with your previous school to ask for recommendations, or was this something that you just did by yourself and
you
sort of
know
did your
I
best guess
don't.
kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I guess my father and I shopped around for laptops the
Hmm.
way that anyone would by going to local computer, well, the way that anyone would have back then,
Yeah,
by going to local computer stores and trying out the demo units.
sure.
Of course, I wasn't able to try out a demo unit with a screen magnifier already loaded, so I had to kind of judge how well it worked for me without the screen magnification and then know that it was going to be better with the
Okay,
magnification.
interesting. Yeah.
So, how we selected the magnification software that we did, I honestly don't remember.
No, that's no worries. Fair enough.
Yeah, the one that we did select, by the way, was called Magic, which stands for magnification in color. Um, and that product went was finally discontinued. Oh, I mean, a much later Windows iteration of that product was finally discontinued about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay, went for a nice long time then.
Yeah, I didn't use it for nearly that long, but um, but that was and it served me well all
Yeah,
the way through high school.
brilliant.
So yeah, I used it to do all sorts of in class assignments, homework, and of course, non school things like, yeah, more learning to program and
Hmm.
eventually hooking up an external modem and getting online at home.
Awesome.
And yeah, goofing off on programming stuff while I was supposed to be doing schoolwork in study hall. Not
Very
playing
good.
games during class, though.
No. Do you mind if we skip on a bit
Sure.
to perhaps sort of uni college time
Yes.
and talk about your experiences and what you did there?
Yes. So, yeah, by the time, well, really, by the time I was in middle school at the latest, I knew that I wanted to be a professional programmer.
Okay.
So, it was obvious that I was going to study uh, programming of some kind, some field that encompassed programming in college. For one semester, because of a scholarship that had been offered, I went down the road of majoring in computer engineering, but then I decided that hardware was really not something I had any interest in, and I didn't want to learn about circuits and electrical engineering and all
Mm.
that. So I went for computer science instead. Changed my major the second semester of my first year of college. I went to college at the largest state, well, the the largest state university here in town. I continue in Wichita, Kansas, Wichita State University. I continued to live at home with my parents uh, all the way through college, and honestly, for far too long after that.
Hmm.
I just didn't have the independent living skills, and the despite the best efforts of the teacher who kept coming and working with me all the way through high school, I didn't really have the orientation and mobility skills or the confidence really to move out, live in a dorm, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, but I, at the same time that I was that I was studying computer science in college, I was starting to do some work on some side projects related to Linux for blind people.
Okay.
Let me back up a bit and talk about how I got reconnected with the current with the current state of assistive technology a
Okay.
few
Yes, please
years
do.
after the I glossed over this during the pre-show, but there's a the pivotal moment here
Okay.
that I don't want to miss. So, uh, early 1998, my third year of high school. I'm spending lots of time on the internet at this point, and in particular, one of my favorite things to do on the internet at that time was I don't know if you've ever heard of MUDs, multi-user dungeons.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a genre of multiplayer online game, but some of the offshoots of the original MUD were less game focused, and they turned into more like text based chat environments with chat rooms with objects that you could program to. They were often referred to as text based virtual worlds,
Hmm.
but the particular variety of MUD that I got hooked on a couple of years before was called a MOO, MUD object oriented.
I love the names.
Yeah, but um, anyway, um, yeah, 1998. I'm hanging out on one of my favorite moves after completing a homework assignment,
Mhm.
and someone pops on who is talking to us about another moo where they're an administrator,
Right.
and so the next evening, looking for a distraction from the next homework assignment, I go over to this other moo and I start playing around there. I become a programmer there and start working on start playing around with with stuff there, and I find out that the head administrator of this other moo is a blind person, and I as I start talking to her and get to know her a little better, and no, there's no, I mean, don't read anything into the gender,
Mhm.
but um, she was much older than me, and if if any, I mean, she 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 was a sort of a mentor to me for a
Yeah.
while, but uh, anyway, I start learning more about how she's using the computer, and by 1998, screen readers for Windows, particularly for Windows 95 and then 98, were becoming more widely used. But this was a in my opinion, this particular moment was a particularly dark time for accessibility on Windows,
Mhm.
because of course the web is becoming very mainstream at this point,
Right.
and web design during this whole time is usually done with really no thought for accessibility. I mean, the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, had their web accessibility initiative, and they were trying to push the web in the direction that they thought it should go. But
Mhm.
I mean, the mainstream commercial web was, for the most part, not following them. And add on top of that, um, so the way that I mean, the web browsers, um, especially Netscape, were not being very helpful to the screen reader developers. And so what the screen readers had to do, and this was how Windows screen readers had to make a lot of applications accessible at this time,
Mhm.
was they would intercept calls to the graphics APIs of Windows, using a technique actually not too different from the sort of output routine interception that I was talking about before. But what they would do is that they would intercept these graphics API calls. Draw a text string here, draw a rectangle there, erase this part of the screen,
Mhm.
and the screen reader would build a model of what was on the screen at any given time.
Yeah.
So it would be, this piece of text is at these XY coordinates and has this foreground and background color. There's a graphic over there with this checksum or stuff like that. And they would have to try to keep this model up to date with what was actually on the screen as the applications were making these graphics API calls. It was a technique that came to be known as an off-screen model, or OSM.
It sounds incredibly onerous for computers of the day.
Um, I mean, I didn't try to implement one of these myself until about 2004, 2005, when computers were much faster. So I don't know really what it was like for the programmers working on this stuff in the 90s to try to optimize. And by the way, the Mac screen reader that I mentioned before, Outspoken, was based entirely on this technique. It had really nothing else.
Wow.
Well, no, maybe no. It might have had a little bit of extra information to go on, but from I don't know a lot about Outspoken, but from what I gathered about it from the little bits I've heard, it seemed to be unusually reliant on its off-screen model as compared to the Windows screen readers that came later. But getting back to web browsing, so if you think about what websites were like at the time, and a typical website layout would use tables or maybe frames to have some navigation links going down the left, while you've got your page content on the right. And if you take a screen reader with its generic off-screen model implementation that knows all of the text that's on the screen, but it doesn't know anything about the structure of the page, and you just read the screen, it's going to be all jumbled because you've got a navigation link on the left and then a line of text and then another navigation link and another line of text. And so when I learned about this state of web accessibility in 98, I was like, wow, this is terrible. Is this going to be a constant uphill battle to try to get all the websites to do like alternative accessible versions? And my friend / mentor, her name was Anne, and I talk about her in past tense because unfortunately she died of cancer in September of 2021.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
When and to make things worse for her, she was using a screen reader for Windows whose developer ended up having to take a day job where working on other things for a company. And so this screen reader that she was dependent on was more or less abandoned. And Windows, and one thing you need to know about screen readers at this time was, even never mind the speech synthesis hardware, which was still very much a thing at this time, the screen reader software was expensive.
Right.
We're talking like $500 and up for a piece of software. And so she was stuck. She couldn't afford another Windows screen reader. I mean, well, she was able to afford another one much later, years later. But in the meantime, I actually did my first accessibility, my first bit of programming to address an accessibility problem in the summer of that year. And this was a modification to the client program that she used to connect to this MOO, because one of the problems that she kept having was that stuff would be happening and a message. The client had a split screen. You would have the output from the server, and then you would have your input area, and so stuff would be happening in real time, and she would be typing her next command or chat message or whatever, and she was liable to miss some output that was coming in while she was typing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I modified the client so that if the input buffer wasn't empty, it would hold any new output until the input buffer was empty, either because she had sent her input or cleared it. So that was my first accessibility related uh, improvement. I was modifying an open source client. I don't think I ever actually submitted my patch upstream. For
Right.
me at the time, it was enough that she
Someone
could
was
use
using
it.
it and it was real. Yeah.
Yeah. I should have submitted it upstream though. Although maybe I wasn't yet confident enough in my mastery of C to like have a real C programmer review it.
Right.
So, but yeah, so like I said, she's stuck with an unmaintained Windows screen reader at this time when web accessibility on Windows is just really awful. And
Yeah.
so we started looking at Linux, and there was one package for Linux in particular that was looking really promising. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Emacs text editor.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so Emacs, of course, is more than a text editor. It's a very powerful, Lisp-based environment, very customizable, extensible. And so there was a package called Emacs Speak, which modified, which well, not even it didn't even have to modify Emacs itself. It used just the extensibility of the Emacs Lisp environment
Hmm.
to add speech output to Emacs.
Right.
So it was more or less a screen reader for Emacs, except that in some ways it could be better than a screen reader because it was tailored specifically for Emacs.
Okay.
And the joke about Emacs is that it's like an operating system pretending to be a text editor. You
Yep.
can you can practically live inside it if you want to.
Hmm.
And so this blind programmer named TV Raman decided that he was going to live in Emacs and make all of the make Emacs and all of the Emacs based applications that he wanted to use accessible to him with Emacs Speak, because he knew that he could make that a more productive, more enjoyable environment for him than any of the DOS or Windows screen readers at the time. Plus the ability, being able to directly access, sit in front of a Unix workstation of whatever kind he had to work on back then and access it directly as opposed to using a DOS PC as a terminal,
Right. Right.
which was what he did before. And
Okay.
by 1998, Emacs Speak was becoming more well known, and Anne and I decided that it was worth giving it a try. Now, I couldn't use Emacs Speak myself at that time, not until the following year, because Emacs, I mean, like I said, using special hardware to do speech synthesis was still a very common, uh, it was still the way that it was usually done at that
Mhm.
time. Um, although purely software based speech synthesis, um, using just a standard sound card or even onboard audio by then was starting to become a thing in '98, but not for Emacs Speak. Um, and so Anne had one of these speech synthesis, I think it was a card that went in her PC.
Mhm.
And unlike with the Echo and Text Talker earlier, for most of these solutions, the speech synthesis was actually done on using some kind of processor on the card. So
Okay.
the PC's main processor would be free. And so I start, but anyway, to make a long story short, I helped her get up and running with Emacs Speak, and I got involved with that community of users. And in '99, around the time that I was finishing up my final year of high school, I got a speech synthesis device of my own. This was an external box that could plug into a serial port. And so now I'm finally getting back to college, which was what you had asked me about earlier.
Yeah.
But I mean, I needed to back up and talk about this other thing because
Yeah,
otherwise
sure.
nothing that followed would make sense.
Okay. Okay.
Um, it,
So
it,
you went to college uni equipped with this new device. Was it sort of at similar sort of time that you got this external box with a serial port connection, or was it?
yeah, well, I think I got the box towards the end of my final year of high school.
Okay.
And right before I went to college, I bought my own laptop. Or bought a much newer laptop
Mhm.
with some of the money that I had made from my first programming job,
Mhm.
which I had been working for about a year and a half by that time, part time while I was in school, and more or less full time during the summer.
Right.
And that lasted for a couple more years after that. But I didn't use the speech synthesizer um, at yeah at college most of the time, because I mean, lugging that around with the laptop
Hmm.
would be a little, and plugging it into the laptop all the time would
Yeah,
have been
absolutely.
inconvenient. But and I say lugging it around. I mean, the external box was very light, but it
Still a
stuffing it
box.
in the laptop case
Yeah,
might
exactly.
have
Yeah.
been it might have been a problem. But
Okay.
anyway, I was getting more involved with Linux. Well, I mean, I had gotten involved in the Emacs Speak user community, and I was answering questions on the mailing list, and I started doing some work on packaging Emacs Speak and related utilities for Red Hat Linux at the
Hmm.
time. I mean, not officially, not in the official Red Hat repository, but as a in a like repository of third party contributions.
Sure.
And but in 1999, another option for Linux came out, and this was a screen reader called SpeakUp, which was actually in the form of a patch to the console driver in the Linux kernel.
Oh wow.
Because a blind programmer and system administrator who at the time was working at a university in Ontario, Canada. He had been accessing his Linux machines using a DOS terminal, a DOS PC with a screen reader as a terminal,
Right.
but he wanted to access his Linux machines directly, and he wanted to be able to have access to whatever was on the text console from boot up through shutdown, including kernel panics, if any.
Hmm.
And so, the way to do that was going to be as a patch to the kernel. And so, one of my so that led into one of my side projects in college, which was there was so the Slackware Linux distribution had a variant that was designed to be easy to run alongside DOS or Windows 9X of that
Hmm.
time. And so I took that version of the distribution, and I added uh, custom compiled kernels with SpeakUp and the drivers for the various speech synthesizers. At that time, you could only have one speech synthesizer driver in the kernel.
Okay.
Um, and I put out my own modified distribution with SpeakUp pre-configured,
Hmm.
so that people could more easily give Linux a try if they had the hardware.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you get much uptake in that?
It got on Slashdot in
Okay.
March of 2000, and as is ever the case with message boards, there was some negative commentary, but I mean, I was happy with the publicity anyway.
Yeah.
And then my follow up project was this was in 2000. If you recall, or if you were around back then, Real Player was a popular way of playing streaming internet audio and
Mm.
video. Real Player was available for Linux, but only as a GUI application, and so the only way that the blind Linux user could run it at the time was using this hack where you would start up like a fake X server and then run Real Player with hopefully the right command line argument to play a particular URL. And if it worked, you would hear the audio, and if it didn't work, you would get nothing because the error was in the GUI.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so, but they had a software development kit or SDK
Hmm.
that was primarily intended as a way of developing plugins for Real Player, but the SDK was powerful enough and general enough that it could instead be used to develop an alternate front end for the player engine. And
Okay.
so I did a command line front end and
Brilliant.
put that out and got some more publicity, including an interview on a long defunct site called linuxnews.com.
Right.
Um, so I mean, yeah, a lot of .coms from then were,
Yeah.
yeah, defunct not long after. But yeah,
That's awesome.
so
So, I think you had an audio clip to play us at some point. Is that what you're referring to here, or is
no,
that
no,
okay? I'll keep quiet
that's
then.
in the next, probably the next segment of the
Okay,
story,
sure.
which is where I meet up with someone named Mike Calvo, who so like I said, I had gotten involved with this Speak Up screen reader project for Linux, and I was active on the Speak Up email discussion list. And one day in January 2001, near the beginning of my, yeah, new semester of college, um, uh, uh, yeah, Mike posted on the list. I knew who he was because I had already heard about this. Well, he had already pre-announced this product
Hmm.
that he was trying to get developed.
Okay.
Um, and but he posted on the list asking for help getting a Linux machine to talk with SpeakUp, and
Right.
I was the one that replied and offered to help him. And so, yeah, one thing led to another. I started setting up some Linux servers for him. Um, and what those servers were for was a product called Freedom Box, that was, I mean, and yeah, say what you will about marketing, yeah, freedom in a product name, but I mean, it was it. I mean, there was something to that because for a blind person, technology is liberating in a lot of ways. It
Yeah.
gives us access to things that we don't have access to any other way. So
Mhm.
so I think it was it was it was an apt name to some extent, but what it was so back in the 2000s, yeah, America Online was still a fairly popular online service, but the idea of an online service was basically this self-contained place where you could have access to all of the functionality, um, of that most consumers wanted in the internet at that time, but
Mhm.
all in one, yeah, self-contained, user-friendly interface. And there
Right.
was really nothing like that for a blind person, and particularly for, I mean, we and yeah, people like me who are, born blind or low vision and grow up that way. Yeah, that's one thing. But if you think about a person who goes blind late in life, yeah, usually in old age, but they want to be connected to their family and friends and to
Hmm.
information and entertainment. Learning how to use a computer with a screen reader at that time, uh, for someone like that would have been a tall order. And so what Mike was trying to develop was a prod an easy to use and affordable user interface for blind people to do the most common tasks that a consumer would want to do online: email,
Okay.
reading news, listening to audio,
Interesting.
shopping, if online shopping, um, and Mike was and is not a programmer. He's an entrepreneur, a businessman.
The idea
Um,
is, yeah.
yeah, but he at the time when I first got in contact with him, he he was trying to get this product developed by one of these outsourced programming companies, overseas,
Right.
where and with mixed success. He had a like a prototype quality product, and his first published audio demo was heavily edited to to hide the deficiencies of the prototype. Um, but nevertheless, he was moving forward with it, and so I helped him set up the Linux servers. Um, the
And those
I
servers were to provide the service.
Yeah,
That's okay.
yeah,
It's the back
yeah.
end.
Because the software itself that you would run on the PC or on these standalone units that we were going to ship, which were really just PCs pre-configured to run the software at
Right.
startup.
Right.
The software had speech recognition, speech synthesis, audio playback functionality in it, but it was really quite a dumb client for the online service.
Hmm.
And so in the summer of 2001, between semesters of college, the software had finally gotten to a point where the offshore development team had given him a build that he was going to go take to the big blindness related conferences
Hmm.
that happened still happen during the summer. Well, it happened to a lesser extent now, perhaps. I mean, they're not as big now as they were back then because there's so much more stuff online now, and the pandemic happened. But
Yeah.
anyway, back then he's gonna demo the software at these conferences, and that was when I finally got and that was when I finally got my hands on the software so I could start playing with it.
Hmm.
And the client software would um, it had some very obvious to both of us bugs in it at the time, and so I started reporting bugs, and the development team mostly didn't fix them,
Right.
and there were like escalating tensions between him and the management at this company because I guess he wasn't able to pay them on schedule. He was running out of money,
Hmm.
um, but he wanted to get it launched. He wanted to get this product launched, and the software was it was well, sorry, I caught myself maybe going somewhere where I really should, going off on a tangent that I really shouldn't.
Okay.
But the short version is um, December of 2001, at the end of another semester of college.
Right.
Uh, and I kind of remember this happening right after I got home from taking my final exam of the semester.
Hmm.
Mike called me and basically asked me, "Can you take over the project and
Wow. Okay.
get version one shipped?" And so I it was very lucky for me at the time that this other job that I had been doing for the past few years, um, they decided that the upper management at that company and that this job had nothing whatsoever to do with accessibility. So it's kind of a footnote in my story.
Right.
But upper management at the company decided to close down the Wichita office. And so in January 2002, I was probably the happiest person in the building about being let go. because I had this other thing with Mike that was consuming as much of my time as I could give it around college. And
Very cool.
so February 2002, the product, sorry, bringing up the audio player so I can get ready to play this clip.
I'm just going to share your screen as well so we can hear it.
Yeah. There's nothing worth looking at on the screen.
No,
but
unfortunately, we need that to hear the audio. So.
Right. So, all right. Well, let me just give a little bit more background before context before I play this. So, the product launched on February 16th, 2002, Saturday. I remember that day very well. I had just finished a few all-nighters to get it ready. It didn't help that we had to switch speech recognition engines very late in the development process. I was implementing push-to-talk functionality under the new engine just a couple nights before. And so on Saturday, I write the trial sign-up form in very bad PHP and publish it, and we're live. And the product got reviewed on a popular internet audio program about technology from a blindness perspective. This show, which later, was like a podcast, except those weren't a thing yet. It later, much later incarnation became an actual podcast, but it was called Main Menu. It was presented by a well-known blind guy in New Zealand named Jonathan Mosen, and he reviewed our product. What I'm actually going to play is not from the original review that came out just a couple weeks after launch, but from a later review when we followed up that launch with a new feature when we actually implemented the online shopping functionality. And the way that we did the online shopping was by screen scraping Amazon.com.
Right.
And as you will hear during the demo, I was very naive about how to do screen scraping, and a bug got through.
Right. Okay.
So, like I said, so this user interface is very, very simplistic with menus, and for input you can do either speech recognition or press mostly numbers on the keypad. Occasional for free-form text entry, the best that we could do with the technology available to us at the time was either entering the text letter by voicing the letter by letter, or enter on a keyboard. And you'll so this is the reviewer, Jonathan Mosen, and he's doing some online shopping, and he's going to search for a book about the Beatles.
Okay. Do you mind maybe, I don't know if it's worth playing maybe sort of 30 seconds to a minute, perhaps, just rather than the whole thing?
Okay, sure.
I don't know if that makes sense or if there's a good stopping point, but that'd be interesting to hear either way.
All right.
Well, we'll go to books, I think. Books.
Okay, please wait.
That's
Welcome
human speech.
To the bookstore. What would you
Pre-recorded
like to do
prompts.
now?
Right.
And again, we'll just pause and wait for the choices that we have.
We'll hear speech synthesis here
I have
in a bit.
deliberately not created an account yet, by the way, so we can go through that process.
Please choose 1. Search. 2. Browse subjects. What would you like to do now?
I'm going to press 1 for search.
Okay.
I'll cut it off as soon as it starts reading the search results.
Please say the author, title, and / or subject, character by character, or type it.
When you're finished, say done or press enter on the keyboard.
A little bit of
Well, it's about time, I think, that I had a new book about the Beatles to scan, so we will type Beatles in here and press enter.
You entered.
Beatles.
Is this correct?
And I can press 1 for yes.
Okay, please wait.
Later in the clip, he uses
There are
speech
more than 100
instead to
products matching your
answer a
search
yes/no
criteria.
question.
You are on page 1 of 18.
Please choose 1.
Beatles gear, all the Fab Four's instruments, from stage
and
to
there, of
studio
course, we have
by
the
Andy
stuff that
Beatty
has
of
to be synthesized.
$28.
Right.
2.
The Beatles
And I think that's enough of that. There later in the clip, there's a bug where it says a couple of raw HTML entities slip through.
Right.
Because
okay.
I was very naive about how to do screen scraping. You can stop. You can take me off screen now.
I have done. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
That's very interesting. So was that actually sort of quite usable as a product? How did it go down with the community?
So, I think at our peak we had 100 something users of that incarnation of the product. It really didn't take off in the way that Mike obviously hoped it would.
Right.
And one of the problems that we had was that the sort of the existing establishment of assistive technology trainers and people that would recommend such products didn't take us seriously. Now, Jonathan, the reviewer that we just listened to, he was very he was quite positive about it. But I mean, it was seen as being too simplistic, I think.
Right.
And what we ended up pivoting away from that style of user interface, never to return, really. And what we did instead was a talking web browser that was much more similar in interface to what you would have now in a modern Windows screen reader, although we did still have some of our own innovations.
Okay.
And that browser, I started developing that in the fall of 2003. We launched it in summer 2004. I had one or two more all-nighters with that launch because right after releasing the final version, I was flying off to meet up with Mike at one of those summer conferences to help him work the exhibit hall booth and demo the product.
Okay.
And that product was based on the Mozilla web browser. I made the regrettable decision to not use what came to be known as the Firefox fork. I used the classic Mozilla code base instead.
Okay.
But it was a working product, and that one was, I would say, much better received. And because I guess because it was just more what people were used to. And I think, well, the main thing, of course, that we had over Windows screen readers was price still at that time.
Okay.
But we had a couple of other features that we were particularly proud of. One of them that I think still has some merit, and we need to now that Mike and I are running our own, running a new company, we want to get back to this at some point and see what else we can do with it. But it's a feature called we called it Community Supported Accessible Web, or Seesaw for short. Mike came up with, well, I think Mike and I collaborated on that name.
Yeah.
But what it is a database of labels for images, for form fields that aren't properly labeled, things of that sort. So if you went to a website that where the images didn't have proper alt text, or some of the form fields weren't properly labeled, if someone had already labeled them, then the browser could automatically download that file of labels for that domain from our server and use them. This, of course,
that's a really great idea. And I presume that'd be more of a sort of plug-in extension type approach.
Yes, we're probably going to ultimately come around to making that an extension for Chrome and the like.
Right. Okay.
But that, I mean, I guess Internet Explorer add-ons were a thing back then, but I had not yet achieved enough of a mastery of Windows programming to develop such a thing. But I would, just a year or so later, because so while we were working on the talking web browser, and again, like FreedomBox version, so we referred to this new talking web browser as FreedomBox version 2.
Okay.
And it did connect up to the same online service as version 1, so you still had that component. I mean, we retired the Amazon screen scraping, because with the browser you could browse Amazon itself and even have labels for the unlabeled images. But other features like the forums and the directory of internet radio stations and all of the audio content that we had still remained, just with a different interface. But like FreedomBox version 1, for version 2, we were going for a self-contained environment that could be used if you didn't have a Windows screen reader. And we even ported it to Linux, which was Mike, that was a case of Mike indulging me, because I wanted to port it to Linux, because I still cared about Linux back then. Okay. But I had to, and well, I had to fill in some gaps in functionality in the desktop Linux platform of that time, compared to what we had on Windows. So, but
so I was just going to say, moving on then from the browser and things, yes. I think you extended that out into a full-on screen reader.
I wrote a full-blown Windows screen reader.
Yeah,
because we found that while we were trying to provide a self-contained environment for people to do everything that you'd want to do on the internet, we found some things that we just couldn't keep within our little, what we'd now call a walled garden.
Right.
And I think in particular, the thing I especially remember was there were a couple of voice chat apps for Windows that were popular in the blind community at the time, and these were external applications that Windows applications, not web applications. You couldn't do voice chat inside a web browser back then, at least not without a plugin. And so we did what we could, in that we would automatically launch the app if we detected that you were going to one of those URLs, but we couldn't talk inside the app. And that, combined with the fact that Windows screen readers continued to be expensive. There's another key development in that area that came a couple of years later, which I'll get to. But we wanted to provide our own lower priced, a more affordable option. And so we wrote, and I need to talk about something else that gave me the confidence and the resources I needed to even begin to attempt such a thing. And that was there was a research group at the computer science department of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, headed up by a professor named Gary Bishop, and they had various research projects in assistive technology. And as part of these projects, they had written a few key Python libraries. I forgot to mention that I was a big fan of Python at this point in my career.
Okay.
But this group had written a few Python libraries. They had one called PyTTS, which was text to speech for Windows using the Microsoft, basically a Python wrapper over the Microsoft Speech API. They had another one called PyHook, which was a library for hooking into the Windows keyboard input subsystem, so you could intercept keyboard input and define your own hotkeys and that kind of thing. And then finally, and most important for the screen reader project, they had a library called PyAA, which the AA stands for Active Accessibility, and that was the name of Microsoft's accessibility API at the time.
Okay.
And I very quickly found out that any real and remotely practically usable screen reader for Windows couldn't rely exclusively on active accessibility, because that API was just too simplistic. It filled a specific need that Windows screen readers started to have in the 90s, but it wasn't the end-all be-all.
Right.
But having that Python library for that API gave me a way of starting to prototype a screen reader and see that I could start moving in that direction and have something to show.
Very cool.
And so fall of 2004, I developed the first prototype in 3 days. Mike and I were initially thinking that maybe we were going to make the screen reader open source, if we could get some funding to develop it, from some outside funding to develop it. He took it he took the prototype and demoed it to some people at the National Federation of the Blind, one of the largest blindness organizations here in the U.S. And quite reasonably, they didn't take us seriously, because we had a prototype that I had developed in 3 days. And were we really going to go up against the giant of the Windows screen reader space at that time? But we decided we were going to keep going and develop it as a product. And because we initially envisioned the screen reader as sort of an add-on for the FreedomBox browser, we referred to it as FreedomBox System Access, because it gave you access to your operating system and the world outside of that application. And when we had to drop the FreedomBox name because of a lawsuit a few years later, the screen reader came to be known as just System Access, or SA. So not a very distinctive name, admittedly, but that's what it is. And I still use, let me switch screen readers here.
Sure.
I still use System Access for some of my web browsing. And if you can put me back up on screen.
Yeah, sure.
System access is ready. Magnification is off. Desktop list recycle bin not selected. 1 of 7.
Okay.
There you go.
How much of that would they have heard? I mean,
we had, I can't remember what it started with, but recycle bin selected.
Okay,
and
let me slow this down.
This is a test of your speech settings.
Okay, and I'm going to demo one of the features, one of the smaller features of System Access that and the FreedomBox 2 browser before that that I'm particularly proud of.
Okay.
And that is, well, maybe not proud of, because it was a straightforward thing to implement, but fond of, that I miss when I use other screen readers. And that is the way that it handles links embedded in text. And for this, I'm going to bring up a Wikipedia article. Let's see.
Rust programming language.
Why not? That there's the sound effect for that community supported accessible web Seesaw feature that I mentioned.
Okay.
Let me just skip over some links here.
Rust programming language. Menu but from Wikipedia the official Rust logo. Paradigms. Multi-paradigm. Concurrent. Functional. Generic. Imperative. Structured. Designed by Graydon Moore. First appeared April 15th, 2015. 7 years ago. Stable release 1.68.01. Edit this on Wiki.
Okay, notice the beeps. And where this really shines is when you have links in line in paragraphs of text. Let's see.
Fine. Rust programming language. R. Rust is a multi-paradigm, high-level, general-purpose programming language. Rust emphasizes performance, type safety, and concurrency. Rust enforces memory safety, that is, that all references point to valid memory, without requiring the use of a garbage collector or reference counting present in other memory-safe languages to simultaneously...
So see, the beeps indicate where the links are without disrupting the flow of the text.
That's awesome.
And it was a simple thing to implement. Even 23-year-old me could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But not many screen readers have that feature.
Interesting. So how would that come across for other screen readers? Just as a block of text with no links sort of highlighted or identified?
I'll show you.
Okay.
Shutting down system access.
And for this, I'll switch to NVDA. Just a little footnote here before I do that. NVDA is a popular open source screen reader for Windows. That development started in 2006. I would say it really got to be usable somewhere as a daily driver somewhere around 2010 to 2012, and that was what ultimately solved the screen reader pricing problem.
Okay.
Not any of our efforts. So let's see if I can go back to the start of the paragraph. Maybe not. Oh, that's why. Because NVDA, of course, I should know that. NVDA isn't aware of where system access's virtual cursor was, so it started back at the top of the page. Yeah. Let me slow that down. Okay, again.
Rust is a link multi-paradigm, link high level, link general purpose programming language. Rust emphasizes link performance, link type safety, and link concurrency. Rust enforces link memory safety. That is.
See how that word link breaks the flow of the text?
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know, and part of that, now that I think about it, part of the issue might be a patent held by the aforementioned giant of the Windows screen reader space. A conglomerate of a company called, relative conglomerate as our industry goes, a company called Freedom Scientific, who is the current owner of the screen reader JAWS for Windows. JAWS, by the way, is an acronym that stands for Job Access with Speech, as in this screen reader gives you the access that you need to get a job.
Yeah.
But JAWS, I'm sure, was a retronym. They started with the name and invented an acronym for it. But anyway, Freedom Scientific, and this patent may finally be expired by now, but they had a patent on a feature of JAWS that they called Speech and Sounds Manager, which allows you to mix sound effects in with your speech. And so they never sued us for violating that patent. They did sue us for the name Freedom Box.
Right, okay.
In 2007 when they came under new management.
Interesting.
And so that was why we had to drop the name Freedom Box. But which I guess we had kind of outgrown that name by that point anyway, because our ambitions at that point really were all about the screen reader, for which we never came up with a better name than System Access.
Right.
But anyway, so the only thing I can guess is that maybe the other screen readers don't have that feature of beeps for links because of the Speech and Sounds Manager patent, but I don't know that for sure.
No, that's interesting. Okay. So I was going to ask then, I think arefs or A tags in HTML can have alt or sort of tooltip type.
Yes, you're thinking of the title attribute.
That's the one. So you've got the pencil there on the bottom right, which is near the stable release that was being announced earlier.
Just a sec.
Sure.
Link. Find dialog. Remain on link stable release. Influenced column to 1.68.0.
Influenced by, NVDA is trying to be smart and read a header for that column in the table, and apparently apparently Wikipedia's tables must not be marked up right. But
right.
Link 1. Link graphic edit this on Wikidata /March 9, 2023, 11 days ago.
Very
so
good.
You had link 1 there and link something else which I didn't catch.
Link graphic edit this on Wikidata /March 9, 2000. Link 1. Edit this on Wikidata graphic link.
Edit this on Wikidata.
Oh,
that
okay.
must be the value of the title attribute for that pencil link.
Yeah, interesting.
So yeah, I mean, no, I mean the table screw up notwithstanding, Wikipedia is really quite accessible.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
but so system access, screen reader. We launched version 1.0 of that in right around the end of 2004. Mm-hmm. Version 2, which was considerably beefed up with a rewritten off-screen model and support for many more applications, came out in March of 2006, and we continued to work on that product for several more years after that. We had a few other products. For instance, in 2009, we did, and you'll see that naming is really not our strong suit, but we had a product called Accessible Event, which was an accessible meeting / webinar product for accessibility here, referring primarily to access to on-screen content like slides and documents. Mm-hmm. We came around to that problem much later came back around to that problem much later after the pandemic and after my stint at Microsoft, which I'll get to in a bit. We also had a document OCR and scanning product. We used one of the commercially available OCR engines, and we did our own user interface for scanning, using a flatbed scanner to scan documents and convert the OCR documents to various formats, including audio MP3 through speech synthesis, mm-hmm. and that kind of thing. Okay. Got into mobile apps a few years later. The what was originally called the Freedom Box Network, which was the online service with the forums and chat rooms and audio content and all those other things that we had, was eventually renamed to Sero, the I guess kind of the root word of the company name, Seratech. Okay. We had versions for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. On all the other platforms, we would just use the whatever screen reader was built into the platform, and on Windows, Sero was still closely integrated with the system access screen reader. But in 2017, Seratech was in decline as a company. There's a lot of stuff that happened that I'm just going to gloss over.
Sure.
It's all been documented elsewhere, and I was kind of off doing my own thing anyway as far as development. Mm-hmm. But in 2017, the company was in decline, but the Windows accessibility team at Microsoft was growing.
Okay.
And I think what that growth can really be attributed to is that Microsoft was at that time still trying to compete with Apple and Google on their respective platforms, both the mobile platforms, and in Google's case, Microsoft was also definitely trying to compete with Chromebooks.
Okay.
And in 2017, even Microsoft was at least running on the inertia of recent attempts to compete in the mobile space. And so as part of that, they needed to, they had introduced Windows and Windows Phone based devices where the operating system was much more locked down than regular PC Windows. It was more in the style of something like iOS. And iOS, I need to back up a bit to talk about iOS because this was a big development in accessibility for blind people. Mm-hmm. So when the iPhone first came out in 2007, I think most of us just assumed that it was not ever going to be usable for us because it was a touchscreen device with like one button on the screen. and the OS was closed, it was locked down. There had been third-party screen readers for the earlier generation of smartphones, such as they were, such as Windows Mobile based on Windows CE, and the Symbian operating system, particularly Nokia's version of it. Mm-hmm. There were third-party screen readers for those platforms because those platforms were open enough to allow third-party, not just to allow third-party apps, but whether by accident or by design, those platforms were open enough to allow third-party developers to, as Mike and I would say, hook and hack, and do what a screen reader needed to do still at that time, but not for the iPhone. And so I think we just kind of wrote it off for a while, and blind people that were using that previous generation of smartphones went on using them, and we just figured that the iPhone was not for us. But then in June of 2009, Apple released their third iPhone model, the iPhone 3GS. Mm-hmm. Along with that, version 3.0 of what would soon be called iOS. And part of that was the VoiceOver screen reader. And VoiceOver, I think caught us all, or at least most of us, by surprise, because it showed us that it was feasible to do a screen reader for an all touch screen device. Mm-hmm. And the way to do that was basically by the screen reader, which of course is an integral part of the platform rather than a third party bolt on, would override all of the touch gestures. And so I don't have a way of showing you what's on my phone screen at the time, and the audio would be coming out of my phone's built-in speaker and back through my microphone, so it might not be worth it to demo. But you would basically like swipe left and right on the screen to find out what's on the screen, and then or you could, if you want to find out if you have some idea of the layout of the screen and you want to find out what's at a particular location on the screen, then you would single tap with one finger to find out what is under your finger at that part of the screen, right, that place on the screen. And then you double tap to activate something. And there's more gestures than that, but that's really the basics of how you'd use a smartphone with a screen reader. And so iOS had VoiceOver built in. Android followed with the TalkBack screen reader. It took several more years before Android was really competitive with iOS in terms of its screen reader and even what the underlying platform would allow the screen reader to do. But nevertheless, by the time that Microsoft, and Windows Phone 7, which was Microsoft's first attempt to compete with this new generation of smartphones, was completely inaccessible. They did nothing in terms of a screen reader, and of course, Windows Phone 7, being their new iOS style lockdown platform, didn't allow for a third-party screen reader anyway. Right. So they started to fill that gap in Windows Phone 8.1, I think, in like 2014, and they knew they needed to beef up their narrator screen reader if they were going to compete with iOS and Android, or indeed with Google Chromebooks, which were making some major inroads into Microsoft's educational sales.
Yep.
So the Windows accessibility team was growing fast in 2016 to 2017. And in April of 2017, just about 6 years ago now, there was a job opening for a developer on the Windows accessibility team. And Mike, my boss at Saratech at the time, he called me early one morning. Well, first he had texted me a link to the job opening, and that woke me up. But I was like, okay, what's this? Try to go back to sleep. He called me, Matt, you've got to take this job. And I'm like, what? I can't leave you. And that's a long story in itself. But I felt like I really couldn't leave Saratech at that time. But he was insistent, and he knew, of course, which way Saratech was headed, and that it was, and that it was gonna, they weren't gonna be able to pay me for much longer.
Right.
And so I applied and went through the interview process. Grueling interview process. I think it was something like 6 hours, 5 interviewers, and 8 programming exercises
In one go?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the on-site interview.
Yeah.
I was dead tired by the end of it. Just wanted to go back to my hotel, order a pizza, listen to some music, and get some sleep before the flight back. But I passed and got the job. Saratech, wind it down. Any new development, and I went off and worked at Microsoft.
Great. I'm conscious we're quite over time. Would you be able to just give us some sort of your key points at Microsoft, and then we'll move on to hopefully have an Access Kit demo?
Sure.
Thing? Yeah.
All right. So at Microsoft, I focused on the narrator screen reader. Well, I mean, ultimately, I was part of a team, and I did whatever I was assigned as part of that team. But I primarily worked on the narrator screen reader and the UI automation platform accessibility API. Okay. Probably about the most visible thing I did in narrator was I debugged the support for the Chrome and Firefox web browsers that they were implementing.
So does this mean that if I'm reading into that correctly, that Narrator has like special handling for specific applications?
So Narrator mostly tries to avoid that, but the difficulty was that Firefox and Chromium don't. For Chromium, it's more complicated now, but Firefox and Chromium didn't implement the UI automation API. They implemented. So I mentioned active accessibility earlier, MSAA for short. UI automation, or UIA, was the official Microsoft successor to MSAA. But for various reasons, what these third-party browsers did instead was there was this extension to MSAA that I think was developed by IBM, and then Mozilla got involved, called iAccessible 2 or IA2, so named because the main COM interface of MSAA was called iAccessible. And so this unofficial third-party extension of MSAA to fill in the gaps in that API, and that was what these browsers implemented. Narrator itself didn't didn't have any support for iAccessible 2, and so what we did was in UI automation we implemented a bridge for accessing IA2 and basically translating it into UIA. So we were most, I mean, we maybe fixed a few bugs in narrator along the way, but we were mostly able to keep that special case outside of narrator.
Right.
And then the other big thing that I was involved with was it was an extension of the UIA API to address some performance problems.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the highlights of my time at Microsoft.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can we then talk about AccessKit?
Sure.
UK could give us a quick overview of what the project is and where it stands today.
All right. Yeah. So
and then we'll hopefully have some demos as well. Yeah.
All right. So, oh my God, we've been going for 2 hours.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I should have said.
Yes. So AccessKit is my attempt to solve a problem that's been bothering me for several years, and that is the fact that most outside of the web browsers and the platform standard GUI implementations and a few other well-funded projects, most GUI toolkits have zero accessibility implementation. And the days of screen readers being able to use something like an off-screen model to hook and hack and intercept graphics APIs and figure out what's on the screen to any extent are over. And if an application or the toolkit that it's built on doesn't implement the platform accessibility API, it's not accessible. And so, I mean, so as I read, as I keep up on what's going on in programming communities through aggregators like Hacker News, and every time that I read about this or that new GUI toolkit, I would almost want to scream because it was practically certain that it wasn't going to be accessible. And
so just to clarify, then
the
point you're making there is that the toolkit itself is not accessible,
right?
But the toolkit is designed to make accessibility support software, whatever it might be. Is that right?
So, well, no. Well, I mean, we're talking about GUI toolkits that are used in applications.
Yes, yeah. Sorry.
So any and particularly like non-web, what would often be called native applications. I mean, the definition of native is very, very problematic, and some would say that native only means applications that use the platform standard UI toolkit. So let's just call it non-web applications. And the reason why all of these toolkits have no implementation of the accessibility APIs is that these APIs tend to be quite arcane, and accessibility itself is like a specialized a specialized area that even a lot of GUI of developers writing their own GUI toolkit don't really know much about. And I mean, I'll just tell a very quick story about UI automation on Windows. And in my second year at Microsoft, I got connected with a group of developers that were working on a programming language and integrated development environment designed for education, for like beginners. And they were very conscious of accessibility and doing everything they could to make their environment accessible. They went on. They had their own GUI toolkit written in the language itself, and they went off to do a UI automation implementation in C++. And in some ways they just got it, well, in one way in particular, they just got it very wrong.
Right.
Because and they were competent developers, but they just didn't know better. based on what they had seen in the like the very small scale toy UIA sample implementations that Microsoft offered.
Okay.
And so that got me thinking, if these guys who are doing their best to implement accessibility but are steered in such a wrong direction even by Microsoft's own sample code, then something needs to be done about that. And at the same time, I was seeing that the probably one of the best accessibility implementations around is the one in the Chromium web browser. But of course that's buried inside the very huge Chromium code base.
Yep.
But the fundamental architecture of that implementation, I saw a lot in there that I liked, and I wanted to be able to like pull that out and into something that would be reusable by GUI toolkits across platforms and ideally across programming languages too. And in 2021, I was really starting to like the Rust programming language, and I was in contact with a developer named Rafe Levine, RAPHLEVIEN, who is who's the lead developer of first he developed a Rust GUI toolkit called Druid. Now he's working on another one, but he works at Google on the on the Google Fonts research team.
Okay.
He and I started talking about my idea for AccessKit, and he liked it, and so he wanted to see if he could get Google to fund my my development of AccessKit. And so in late 2021, I got a contract with Google through via his team to start doing some work on AccessKit, and then I got a much bigger contract last year. And so where the project is at now is we have backends for Windows, Mac, and a Linux backend in progress. And I'll just focus on the Windows and Mac backends for now.
Sure.
We have support for some of the basic types of controls, such as buttons, sliders, checkboxes, a few other types, and the most complex of all, text editing controls. And now I can do a demo. Which one do you want me to do? You want me to do the eGUI demo, or should I jump straight to the game using the Unity engine? That one might be more interesting.
Yeah, go for it. I'll let you pick.
All right, so I'm just going to do, and let me switch speech synthesizers here to something that will be a little more
categories. List general 1 of 14. Speech 2 of 14. Speech properties change. Button alt left. Select in Windows 1.
NVDA settings. Edit cat. Apply but cancel. OK. Command.
That's better, I think.
Cool.
So as a little side project last year, it's part of AccessKit, but it wasn't part of the Google contract. I and my main collaborator, a young, also low vision developer named Arnold, decided that we wanted to try see if we could integrate AccessKit into a project that was using the Unity game engine. So, and Unity, there is there's an existing plugin for Unity that can make a game talk by either using the operating system's speech synthesis API, or some of the Windows screen readers have a way of sending text directly to the screen reader to be spoken.
Okay.
But that's not the same as exposing the content and structure of the user interface in a way that the screen reader can read in its standard way. So we have here a simple choice-based story game called The Intercept. It's pretty simple. It's just some text and buttons. And here we're going to see where the screen reader will automatically read out the text, and you can move between the text and the buttons.
C.
And make your
Users
choice.
Matt TM.
So,
The Intercept.
This was an open source game that someone else developed and we modified.
Okay.
Inkle presents. The Intercept. They are keeping me waiting.
Okay, so there's our first bit of story text, and I can press, as is a standard keyboard shortcut here, I can press Tab.
HUD 14 button.
I can use, and this is a crucial difference between what AccessKit is doing and what this other Unity plugin does. I can use standard screen reader commands to move through the things on the screen, so I can go back and reread the text.
No previous.
Oh, or not? Hang on.
Pane.
Hang on.
HUD 14 button. Pane. No previous. HUD 4.
Hang on. Let me tweak a screen reader setting here. I keep
NV,
forgetting.
Romanian, Russian.
No, not
user
that.
Category review follow simple review mode checkbox not checked.
Turn that back on.
The Intercept window.
Now.
HUD 14 button.
Oh, that's another key difference. When you come back to the window, the screen reader can reread whatever has the focus. And now...
They are keeping me waiting.
That's better. And move back to the button.
HUD 14 button.
I can press...
Very cool.
Which is it? Enter?
The Intercept window. HUD 14. The door was locked after I sat down. I don't even have a pen to do any work. There's a copy of the morning's Intercept in my pocket, but staring at the jumbled letters will only drive me mad. I am not a machine, whatever they say about me.
And I can tab
Think
through
button. Plan button.
choices here. You get the idea.
Command.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what exactly is going on there, and what did you have to do to bring that interface to the front?
All right, so I'll start with what we did in Unity itself, and this was mostly Arnold's doing. I stepped in and helped a little bit, but he did most of the heavy lifting on the Unity side of it. So Unity has this concept of game objects, where these are objects that are exposed to the Unity editor UI, and you can set properties on them through the visual editor and stuff like that. And so in that game already, each paragraph of text and each of those choice buttons was a game object. So and user interface elements like that are typically represented as game objects. And so Arnold wrote a behavior, which is basically a component or a piece of logic that you can add to a game object to add accessibility properties to the object, such as what is its name, what type of object is it. In this case, is it a static text or a button?
Right.
And then he implemented a way that those game objects could receive keyboard focus by pressing tab, and that focusing on UI elements through the keyboard is something that the toolkit or still has to do on its own outside of AccessKit. But then where AccessKit comes in is he one of the functions that he wrote would look through all of the game objects that had this accessibility behavior and gather them all in and generate AccessKit node structures for each object. So the central concept of accessibility APIs in general is what's called the accessibility tree, where like the window is the root object, and then the text, the pieces of text and the buttons would be child nodes. And as you saw when I had the other screen review mode turned on earlier, it was giving me raw access to some intermediate tree nodes called like panes that could group things together. Access that by the way, that demo is an old version of Access Kit. Access Kit itself now flattens out the structure before exposing it to the platform. And so he would and so this code on the Unity side, which was written in C#, built up all of the Access Kit nodes and serialized them through JSON in this case, but I'm looking at possible alternatives, and would make basically a C API call to the native code component of this Unity plugin, which was a library written in Rust that had Access Kit as the core of Access Kit as a dependency. And Access Kit takes a structure called a tree update, which can be either a full accessibility tree or an incremental update of just what has changed. The Unity plugin was as being a prototype, sent a full update for every frame, which is something that I think Arnold has improved in a later version. But Access Kit would take these tree updates and maintain a tree structure in memory, which could then be used by the backend implementations, which would implement the platform accessibility APIs like UI automation on Windows. And these backends would answer queries from the screen reader or other assistive technology, and look at the tree structure to answer queries like what node has the focus, what's the root node of the window, and then the other key thing that Access Kit does, and this is something that makes that helps make the toolkit developer's job easier, is when the toolkit sends a tree update, Access Kit will basically look at the diff of look at what has changed between the old nodes and the new ones, and fire the appropriate platform specific events to say, well, this node has focus now, or this piece of text that's a live region appeared. And a live region is what enables a screen reader to what tells a screen reader that it should automatically speak that piece of text. So things like the story text that the game was showing would be marked as a live region, so the screen reader would speak it.
Okay, that's very cool. The screen reader and NVDA, I think you're using, is obviously a process in its own right, and that sort of hooks into Microsoft's API, I presume.
So it's inter-process communication, or IPC. On Windows and Mac, the IPC details are obscured from the toolkit or even from Access Kit by the platform. On Linux, we have to do our own IPC. We have to implement the IPC ourselves, and that's a current pain point for the project on that platform. And one of the things that I worked on at Microsoft was making that IPC more efficient, so that it wouldn't have to be a large number of round trips.
Interesting. I was going to then sort of follow that on. Sorry. So the screen reader it's its own process.
Sure.
Uses IPC to get data out of other processes.
Yeah.
Is Access Kit then another process which sort of looks inside?
No, it's
Unity,
a library.
Or is built into Unity as part of?
It's a library that's linked into whatever.
Yeah.
So in the eGUI demo that you watched earlier, and that we could maybe provide people can find it on the Access Kit website.
Yeah, that is linked in the description below, by the way.
So, So Access Kit would be directly statically linked into an application that's using something like eGUI. In the case of the Unity plugin, the native code part of that plugin is a DLL that links in AccessKit. And yeah, so AccessKit is a library running inside the application.
Yeah, amazing. Very cool. That's fantastic. Well done.
Yeah, and we Arnold is now working on a C API for AccessKit, so that's going to open it up to directly in the case of C and C++, and indirectly for lots of other languages that can access C libraries.
Yeah, brilliant. That's very cool. As I said, the link is in the description below, so anyone watching who's interested, please feel free to click through and have a look at this. It's I think it's a very cool project. Well done.
Thanks.
I think probably at a good point to wrap up and say goodbye. Is there anything else you'd like to announce or shout out about or share with the viewers?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
Well, I do have a GitHub sponsors profile, so and we can get a link to that added.
That'd be great.
And apologies for overlooking that before, but if anyone would like to fund or help fund my ongoing work on AccessKit, I have a GitHub sponsors profile, and that's it.
Great. I've actually got a question. I love Scratch. Sorry, I love Scrotch has come in and said, how long were you at Microsoft?
About 3.5 years.
3.5. Okay.
June 2017. To middle of November 2020.
Okay, and I'm going to read into that question a bit. How did you find it there? Was it welcoming and a nice place to be?
Yeah. It got much less fun when the pandemic happened and we were all working out of our apartments and I was across the country from my family. And by that point, Mike and I had ideas for new products, one of which I had already, in fact, been developing on the side, and then combined with some things that happened on my team at Microsoft that I don't think I should talk about publicly, I decided it was time to move on.
Right, fair enough. Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been fantastic to hear about all these things and the history that I was so unaware of so much of it, which is it's awesome to see that it existed. And thank you for all the demos. That's been really good as well.
Yeah, it's been fun.
So I think it's probably goodbye from us.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody. And we'll see you again soon.